Welcome to another episode of Living Well with Rentwell. I'm your co-host, TJ Hock. I am here with Kristen Donnelly, and I am really excited for today's conversation. We are going to talk about empathy and leadership. And I was sharing with Kristen before the conversation here today that I was on a coaching call last week, and the coach said, TJ, what we really need to do is work on your empathy. If you really want to be this leader that you're talking about, this business owner that you're talking about, it's learning to lead with empathy, and at least for me personally, having a little more empathy and not necessarily going so much to my head and trying to logic everything out. And so the timeliness of this conversation is providential. Very excited to get into it. But Kristen, before we do, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. And let me just follow up on that train of thought really quickly before I introduce myself, which is that the good news is that in all of my research and all of our research at Abbey Research, empathy is actually something you can logic. It is something that you can use your brain for, because empathy is not about emotions. It's about choosing understanding instead of assuming something about the other person. So it's actually quite a lot of mental work. It's quite a lot of mental framework. It's just using all of that logic on somebody else and not yourself.
Interesting. Okay.
And so we'll get into that. And how I came to all that understanding is that I've been in a family business for over 30 years. And my family was one of those families that, like, when I was 7, I was still doing child labor, like, at night in like cleaning cans or whatever. And we have a mission statement, and it's to impact lives and create holistic wealth. So we do that through manufacturing, primarily in the last, probably the first 25 years of our existence. We did this primarily through manufacturing. Dyes and colorants for diagnostic stains. So we make the stains that diagnose cancer. We make the color for the outside of Advil. We have a division that does high-grade epoxies to fix the inside of ships when they're already underwater. It's called Abbey Color. Abbey Companies is the branch of all of them. My brother and I have taken it over from our dad in the last couple of years. But what that meant is that I was always raised by, when I say dramatic, like, I was into drama and stories and humans, and that's what I was always into. And I was raised by parents. My mom's an English major and my dad's an accountant. And their question was always, how does this feed people? How does this put food on the table? How do we, as people who employ people, how do we contribute to their overall well-being? Because we decided as a family that we were going to hire people that a lot of folks won't hire. So directly out of the penal system, in halfway houses, folks who have made poor choices or who had really poor choices made for them. And usually a combination of the both. And the traditional kind of business term for that is second chance employer. And that's true. I mean, some of our folks are on their 19th chance here. But it's also a really good reminder to my family that we're all on our 2nd, 3rd, 8th, 9th, 15th chances too. And our safety net just looked different. So from the very beginning of this journey, when I was 7, when we bought this company, I was taught every single day in every conversation we had that different people are different. And that that's not a moral judgment. And that even if somebody makes a decision that I disagree with, they are still a human person who has dignity and worth and deserves a chance to make their own way in the world. And my job as somebody who was, in the American parlance, proverbially born on third base, is to get home, get back up to bat, and get as many other folks home as possible. And that's my job, to leverage my privilege for the power of other people. That's my responsibility. So I did that for a lot of different ways. I've been a youth worker, a volunteer youth worker in a couple different countries. I did college, like, teaching for a little bit. And then when I finished my PhD, which I did in Northern Ireland in sociology, I have 2 master's degrees as well, both in people-based things. At the time, my brother was already working for the family company, and he said, why don't you come home and let's figure out how we can take your skills and use them to teach other people that we can do this thing in business. You can run a business without background, where you don't do a background check on an employee and still not have a layoff in 30 years.
Wow.
You can hire people who don't have a high school education and still not have a product recall in 30 years. You can do it. So we started a division called Abbey Research that I'm in charge of. And now what I do is go around the world and show up on gracious podcast hosts podcasts and talk about how our driving principles as a family can shape your business, can help you get, we're really tiny, we're 25 folks. So there's some things that we can do that maybe you can't do, but the principles of what we do, everybody can do, which is to remember that different people are different and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm excited to unpack all this. And when you're talking about different people have different thoughts and opinions, it reminds me, I just finished reading the book Difficult Conversations.
It's a great
Really,
one.
how he talks, I think he uses the analogy of the beach ball, where if I hold it in between us, it's a beach ball, but I see the blue side, you see the green side, and we both grew up in very different worlds, probably, and have different life agreements and assumptions and stories, and what we were taught was right or wrong or truth or not. And so we show up in life with all these stories behind us. And just
Yep.
because somebody has a different view doesn't mean they're wrong.
Nope.
It's coming at it more from, I read this and it was fascinating. Remove assumption, the word assumption, and replace it with ask.
Yep.
And,
That's our motto is ask more questions, make less assumptions. That's
wow.
the core of empathy. Ask more questions, make less assumptions of yourself and other people. Do that intentionally and consistently. And that's empathetic based leadership.
So now you had actually mentioned holistic wealth. I'm just curious, what does that mean to you?
So we as a family don't believe that providing financial wealth is enough. We have to provide opportunities for people to access emotional, spiritual, psychological, and social wealth as well. So it's for instance, one of the things that we've always promised our employees is that anyone who wants to do more education will pay for it. If they want to get a GED, we'll pay for it. If they want to go to college, we'll pay for it. If they want to get higher degrees, like a PhD or something, that one has to do something for the company. But your basic GED and bachelor's, like, we will just help you gain that level of wealth. We make a commitment to all of our employees that they will remain physically safe in this building. And also that we want to, really, as owners, I see my job as making sure that everybody here can do their job, which is serving our customers. So my job is to keep them safe, keep it open, keep the lights on, keep payroll happening. And those are kind of my commitments to them, is that I will give you an opportunity to be your best professional self, and then I'll get the hell out of your way.
I like that.
And so, like, that's holistic wealth to us. Like, we've got financial success stories for sure. Like, our first hire, we got him right out of prison. Now he owns a couple different houses. He has his own real estate investing company. Like, amazing. Sure. Great. But we've also got the ones where it's like, yeah, I went to therapy because you guys told me to. I worked on my anger management. I have a better relationship with my kids and my multiple baby mamas, and I have relationships beyond my furnishments now. So, like, that's important to us too. That you are your whole person here, that you are your whole self. And we want you to be that whole self when you come with us, which means that different people are different and they get to be different.
I love it. And I think it's such a wake up call to business owners and probably even smaller business owners, of this idea that I think it's seen more as an expense to do these kind of things for your employees or team members. And instead they really should see it more as an investment. The days of the whole, like almost military dictatorship type management style of 30, 40 years ago.
It just don't work. No.
It doesn't work today.
I've got the data too, if you ever want to see it, that millennials and Gen Z will leave a company so fast if they're treated like cogs in a machine and not like people. And it just doesn't. It's like one of the stories that we tell, for instance, and how we've transitioned from different generational leadership. So my dad's a boomer. My brother and I are millennials. So when my dad turned over the company, he was 69 and I was, 37, I think. And my brother is a little bit younger than me. So my dad believes in, we call it pound the table leadership. Pound the table. So he walks into a room when something's wrong and he pounds the table and says, "What the hell is wrong? Give me results. What's going on?" Like, really, really aggressive, uses his anger a lot. And my brother and I are curious leaders. where we sit down. And so in a disciplinary meeting in particular, we always start with, so tell me what happened. Tell me your side of the story. Tell me why you made that decision. Help me understand. And that has now, in the 90s, when my dad, and the aughts, when my dad did that kind of leadership, that was totally okay. We didn't really lose a lot of people. But in the, like, for that reason, like, people didn't quit because he was obnoxious all that often. They certainly still did, because it's a leadership style that's very specific and not everybody responds to. But what we've seen is in the last 8 years, since my brother and I really got involved and started taking over, is that our turnover is like 9%. And it crosses generations where people feel more valued and more heard. And it also means that, like, we get to know them as humans. And we know if somebody's coming in and they're being a space cadet, I know that it's probably because there's another shooting in their neighborhood last night, because I know where they live. And so, like, maybe they lost somebody, and I can just check in with them real quick and say, like, hey, because we're in the Kensington neighbor section of Philadelphia, which is incredibly violent. And so I can just be like, hey, everything okay? And they might lie to me, and they might be like, yeah, everything's fine. But they also know that I knew enough to take the time to check in with them. And if it's not me, if we don't have that relationship, somebody in the building does. Their supervisor will check in with them. My brother will check in with them. Something will happen because we've done enough to, like, learn a little bit how their brains work.
I'm curious if it's very inspiring to hear that. And what's going through my head is this idea of just emotional intelligence. And I think,
oh, for sure,
hearing more and more about that. And so I'm curious. I have a lot of questions, but to you, like, what is, I've heard a lot of different definitions of what emotional intelligence is. I'm curious to hear yours, and really why does that matter to us as humans?
My gosh. Okay. So fundamentally what it is knowing yourself and being patient enough to know other people. That's fundamentally what emotional intelligence is. And why it's important is that we are not robots. And, like, that sounds crazy, right? Like, that sounds like, of course, Kristen, of course we're not robots. The problem is that naturally as human beings, so like you and I are chatting, everything's great. Let's say we got into a conflict. Naturally, I will assume that you see the world the same way I do. So you say something that I take deep offense to, because when I say that thing, I mean this. And instead of pausing to say, now, does TJ really mean that? Is that really what he intended? Was that a slip of the tongue? What is these things? I just immediately go, oh, well, he must be an asshole, because when I say that, I'm being an asshole. So having emotional intelligence is that is moving past the knee-jerk reaction of seeing everybody in the world as another carbon copy of you. And having a developed mental muscle, because it's mental, having a developed mental muscle that automatically kicks in to remind you that you are not a mind reader and they are not you. Now, the discipline to get there is empathy.
Okay.
Emotional intelligence is the thing that, like, results, essentially. Is that, like, so for instance, right, I've been doing this for a long time, right? So listeners, right now, I'm talking a lot with my hands because I do. And I'm leaning forward and I'm really excited. And my eyebrows are going up and everything's really intense. And TJ is a little bit more closed off. And he's got a really classic thinking face. And he's smiling a little bit. But he's also like, I'm wondering, my curiosity is if he's just really processing all of this. And can he process as fast as I'm presenting these ideas? Am I being unkind as a guest because I'm talking too fast? So, like, that's the kind of thing that I innately do now. Am I good at it all the time? Oh God, no. Are there people I cannot be emotionally intelligent with my father in a fight with him. Absolutely not. He pushes every single one of my buttons. He's been doing it for 39 years. Like, that's that. But I was very blessed. I got married a little bit later than traditional. So I got married in my 30s, which means I had 10 to 15 years of this work under my belt, which means that my marriage got off to a much more honest start than had we gotten married in our early 20s. And I knew to kind of have some of these conversations. And we're a cross-cultural marriage. My husband is from Northern Ireland and grew up there, and I'm American, and have lived most of my American life in Philadelphia. And also Texas, which is a separate conversation. We can have some time about the different American cultures and how different people are different. But but empathy is that worldview. It's that muscle that you work through, and emotional intelligence is the outcome.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So how do you start there? And when you're talking about, you're sharing, what's going on in your mind from, I guess, many years of training on this, getting to emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I know when I'm in a conversation, your mind never stops. And then you almost become distracted by listening to what's going on in your head and not really what the other person's saying. So to your point, this is much like kind of going to the gym and you exercise, and the more you work the muscle, hopefully the easier it becomes.
Correct.
So how does somebody start with this? I'm just thinking of the word, again, empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Any tips, tricks on?
So many. Because here's the really good news. You get to start over again every day. You get to start over again every conversation. You get to start so like you have a really great empathy day. Amazing. So here's a couple different ways you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you are somebody who absolutely loathes letting anyone know you have a weakness and you need to do this all by yourself for a little while, great news. Netflix is your friend. Find a documentary, find a series about a population of people different than you.
Okay.
Spend 2 hours, 6 hours, a series, and instead of just consuming, engage your brain a little bit and ask curious questions. Great example is in the beginning of 2001, there was a series of terrorist attacks on Asian spas in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was terrible. And there was a whole lot about purity culture in there, which I'm very versed in. But then I started, and so I thought I knew what was going on. And I had that arrogance of like, oh, well, I understand this because I understand this one piece of it. And then I had a bit of a reality check where I realized that I know nothing about Asian American communities, really, beyond having a few friends and really enjoying several of the cuisines. So, and my partner and best friend, the other good doctor of Abbey research, Erin, is the same way. So we went to our friend who is married to a Cambodian refugee. And we just said like, hey, where do we even start? And she said, well, I'm sure you've seen the documentary on PBS. And I was like, I'm sorry? The what now? So on PBS here in the United States, completely free for absolutely everybody until the year 2034, is a 6-hour documentary on the history of the Asian American experience. Every group that came over, how the political process started, it's literally called Asian Americans. It is 6 hours of your life, and I learned so much. And if you think about it as time and money investment, so anyone listening to this is business minded because that's your audience and that's who we're talking to today. So 6 hours of your wild and precious life could lead to multi-million-dollar deals because you understand the culture just a little bit better, because you don't make certain jokes anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Because you know that all Asian food is not the same. Because you understand the Chinese Exclusion Act, because you get like what you understand that someone in this country has always been denied housing based on their race. Always. So you're in real estate. You should know that, honestly. Understand the history a little bit of how we excluded people. Because whether you're uncomfortable with that truth or not is honestly irrelevant. It's facts. It happened. What are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things with practicing empathy is that it really removes a lot of moral judgments, because it doesn't matter if I agree with you or not, because understanding isn't agreeing or condoning. Understanding is simply understanding. So it doesn't matter if the client that I'm working with has incredibly racist views and I know they're nuts. I don't sit there and argue with them, because arguing with anyone never changes their mind. Instead, I can see why they think those things if that's necessary for my understanding. I can adjust my relationship with them accordingly, i.e., they're not going to be my friend. I'm not going to trust them. I don't want to hang out with this person. But I can serve them how they need to be served, where they're at, because I can seek understanding. So if you don't want to talk to anybody about this, pick a documentary. My website, we have a ton of things. We have a ton of coverage. Our website is argooddoctors.com. You can find all of our recommendation lists. You can email me directly, and I'm happy to give you a tailored recommendation. So that's one. The other one is if you have a partner in some fashion, whether it's a covenantal marriage partner or a business partner or a best friend, You can do very basic social work training exercises on active listening. You can find them on the internet. They're pretty simple. Intentionally sit down with somebody and say, we're going to talk about this for 5 minutes. Pick a topic. Pick 3 minutes. Set a timer. And then challenge yourself to that you have to be able to tell that story back to them.
Repeat it back.
You have to give it back to them. What I heard was, your brain will never shut off, ever. But with the more practice, I no longer, I shouldn't say I no longer. Most of the time when I'm being good, I no longer wait for the other person to stop talking so that I can start talking.
Okay.
I instead engage in conversation with them. Most of us treat conversations like interviews, where we're not on equal footing and we're just there to get the information we need to sound smart, to achieve a goal. But fundamentally, every conversation is a relationship builder or destroyer, every single one. And so if you enter into that with the intentionality of leaning into what's being said, what you say is not nearly as important as making sure that they feel heard. So tips and tricks of the trade, you say things like, what I heard was, this is what I heard, can you correct me? You said this, I don't understand, can you explain more? Or the very famous social work, can you unpack that more?
Yeah.
I don't see how you got there, help me. More and more questions that center the fact that you are trying desperately to understand them, because every human wants to be seen, heard, and understood. That's a universal need for all of us, seen, heard, and understood.
Good.
So every single time you can do that as a business person, as a human, as a spouse, as a sibling, you advance relationship.
So what do you do if you're coming, I really like the idea of that, and kind of just, I almost want to say in theory, I get how it works. What if I'll relate it to our space. I just got off a call with an owner or maybe a resident who's really irate about something.
Mm-hmm.
And now I need to go talk to a team member because maybe the tenant or the owner said, well, so-and-so team member did so-and-so, and now I have to go have a conversation with them, or maybe the other way around. And so now I'm worked up. I'm a little heated from getting out of the conversation. So now I want to go have this conversation, try to be empathetic or have empathy. What would you recommend? Is that a good opportunity to just like stop?
Oh yeah.
Breathe a little bit first?
Uh-huh. Anger is never a good place to enter into anything with, honestly, except maybe a boxing ring. I don't know. But like, take a breath. There's almost no email on the planet that needs to be responded to in 7 seconds. Like, right. If you can't respond centering the other person's humanity, if you're going to walk in there and think of them as an absolute idiot who ruined your life, don't do that.
Don't do it.
Take a break. Take a breath, take a walk, take a something. Because what you should do go in is say, hey, I just got off this call and here's what I was told. Can you give me your side of the story? Or, hey, I just got off this call and I got a real quick question. I think I'm missing some pieces. What's going on with the Sunnydale property? And then if you open it up by letting them tell their side, and then you can go back and be like, well, that's really interesting. Please help me understand here, because that is not the story I'm getting from them. So we have a real communication breakdown. And as a team, I think we need to solve this.
Yeah. It makes sense.
It's hard as hell. Like, hear me. Everything I teach is so simple. Love people. Remember that they're people. Center their humanity. Real simple stuff to say out loud. Disciplinary, difficult adulting to put into practice. Which is why my number one thing is always give yourself grace. You're going to screw this up. You're going to screw this up. Well, and that's okay.
And especially if somebody's intimidated, because I can think of a few team members and even outside of the company who, probably is intimidated by the other person and
100%
isn't even comfortable having this conversation.
Yep.
And so I really like the idea of, well, maybe you just start with those that you know, like, and trust a little better. Maybe you're a little more comfortable with, or do a documentary and just almost practice on yourself until you become more comfortable with that.
100.
I think it's an amazing way to start the process. And do you have any books? Maybe some of our listeners are pretty avid readers. Are there
Oh
any?
yeah, if you haven't read Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, that's a really good place to start. That one is I teach it every semester in the internship program that I run for business college students.
Oh, really?
Because it's a really good pragmatic breakdown of everything she teaches in terms of how to lead other people. So I really recommend that one. And then this is kind of nuts, but I always recommend fiction because it's another way to crawl inside someone else's head and someone else's life. So if you are an avid reader who reads a ton of crime novels, challenge yourself and read a romance. If you read all nonfiction, challenge yourself and read a fiction. If you read all fiction, find a memoir. Find something that's just a little bit outside your genre that stretches you just a little bit. Because here's the secret about brains. Our brains are designed to keep us in stasis.
Yeah.
They don't want change. They're terrified of it. So anytime, this is why New Year's resolutions are absolute bullshit, because they're too big and too grand for our brains to handle. You want to make tiny incremental changes upon yourself and upon the earth. You make a tiny change that becomes a habit, and then you move on and make the next tiny change that becomes a habit.
So do you think this is, I think you might have, thank you for sharing that. It might have been on your TED talk or maybe another YouTube video I had seen, but you were talking about just almost the state of exhaustion of employees these days. And I'm curious, is this in any way related? Is it a mental exhaustion? Is it a physical exhaustion? What did you mean by that?
That's a great question. So I get asked to talk a lot about burnout in corporate settings and that kind of buzzword. And one of the things that I do as a sociologist and as a social scientist, and you'll see this in all of our work, is talk about context. So why are we so physically and emotionally exhausted? Well, there's a couple of reasons. And one is that, but one of the main reasons is that the American civil religion is capitalism. And the American civil religion is capitalism. So America has never had a state church. We are not a Christian nation. We've never had a state religion. We're in fact founded as the very first country that didn't have one. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a cultural religion and a God that we worship as a culture. And that God is success. That God is financial stability. That's really, whatever that means for us, that's the God we worship. But the problem with that is that without careful moderation, regulation, engagement, capitalism is a voracious monster who will eat everything you are. And so you have a system that is designed for you to become successful as long as you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, sleep when you're dead, work forever. And you have a body that's like, hi, we need to stop. And we don't have a lot of allowances. We've taken away a lot of the allowances, actually. We don't have a lot of allowances in the capital system that remembers that we are all human beings and not human doings. And so companies are finding more and more that this comes out in this conversation with the current millennial and Gen Z obsession with work-life balance.
Yeah.
That nobody is interested in living to work anymore. Because and I'll say this myself, my father built this company from, nothing to a couple, $20 million evaluation. Amazing. He did it largely by himself after his partner died. He's had 6 heart attacks. He has almost no friends left because the company ate his entire life.
Yeah.
Cool. That sounds miserable to me. So my brother and I have set out to say, that's not what we're going to do. We're both married. He's got young kids. I have friends and family all around the world. I believe deeply in going to Disney at least once every couple of years because I like being 5. This company is our legacy. I love it. I live and breathe it. I think about it all the time. And I routinely take vacations.
That's great.
Because I do not only exist to make money for myself or other people. I just don't. And so the best way that employers can address this issue is by being very realistic about a couple things. One, if you are an owner or a founder, nobody else in that building cares as much as you do, and that's not a moral failing on their part.
Yeah.
You just got to understand that. 2, be really clear about when you can contact people and when you can't. because if there's ever an emergency and you violate that, people know what that means. So for example, in our company, we ask deeply. Some people can do this, but we say our preference is that you do not have work email on your phone. You don't need it. You don't work nights or weekends. We're in manufacturing. You don't work nights or weekends. If you are somebody who your anxiety means that you have to check something at like 2 o'clock in the morning, you're welcome to do it. But if we find out that you are actively engaging with customers at 2 o'clock in the morning, we will be angry.
Wow.
Because that's not your job here. We don't pay you enough for that.
That's a massive shift in the culture we live in. And the mastermind, I'm part of the COO Alliance mastermind group, and it's led by Cameron Harold, the co-founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And he challenges all the members there. Like, you start everybody with, a minimum of 4 weeks vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And he referenced all the different studies that are out there. I forget the name of the book. It was the one by Malcolm Gladwell, but he had said the only difference they found when they were studying like the top of the top athletes, like Serena Williams and Michael Jordan, they took a little extra break in between when they would rest. And it could just be seconds or minutes, but it's the only thing they found as a differentiator between the really top performers and all the other professional athletes.
For sure. And that's the thing. Like if you are somebody who goes to a gym, I am not, for a host of reasons. But you know that if you worked out the exact same muscle every single day for 5 days in a row, you'd tear something, right? Like that, you can't do that. You have to work out different systems. You also have to rest. Why don't we do that with our brains or our souls is because of this capital system that says you owe me your entire being to make me money. So as a business owner, couple things you get to decide. So for instance, if I need to get a hold of my office manager on a weekend and I'm calling her, I'm not crying wolf. She knows something is legitimately wrong and I really need her. We do not contact people on vacation, which means if your phone rings, if your phone rings from me and you're on vacation, you know that like DEFCON 5 has happened.
I like that.
Because we're still a small company. There are people here that only know certain things. But will I go to like the ends of the earth and back to answer a question before I call you? Absolutely. My brother has 2 kids. We did not contact him on paternity leave. We just did not. The FDA walked in the building for an inspection, and I told him after they were gone. Because we also structure things around here that people can leave. We intentionally cross-train. We make sure that there are procedures written down. And if we can do that with 25 people and a labor force with whom some of them can't super read in English, then I promise you can set up similar systems where you are. But you have to decide if your profit margin is more important than the people, or if you want to hold those things in tension. If you hold them in tension, you get results like low turnover and longevity and more creativity and all of that other stuff that the studies will share. But it's a very hard shift for a lot of people. But I need to get a hold of my employees all the time. Okay, so let's differentiate some things. They don't want to answer their emails after 5. Okay, so you don't email them after 5. Let's say you're in an industry, like we work with college athletics. College athletics is a 24-hour job. So what we say is, okay, don't email them after 5 or on weekends. Everybody downloads the Voxer app, and you have those notifications turned on. So if Voxer goes off at nights or weekends, you know it's an emergency. You know that you are maybe not in like a 9, you are needed in that moment. Mm-hmm. I won't abuse it, and I won't make you check your email, but I still need to be able to get a hold of you. So let's think creatively about this. Let's get a WhatsApp group going. Okay, I won't use this. If you don't want Slack or email at night, fine. But I still might need you, so let's come up with something else. And state that up front. Have those negotiations. Because then you also know if a person looks at you and goes, that's unacceptable, I can't do that, they're not a right fit for your organization. And you get to say goodbye with no hard feelings.
Well, and I think that's a challenge, at least in the property management space, because again, that's 24 hours.
Yep.
Toilets don't stop.
Yep.
Or, things happen after hours.
Correct.
And a study just came out from NARPM that expect 25% of your property managers to resign every 2 to 3 years. And, some people could look at that and say, oh, wow. All right. Well, that's just the way it is. My business partner and I are looking at it like, okay, well, that's good information to know. Now, what can we do about it? How can
Correct.
we be different? How can we? Because that's kind of like, for at a human interaction level, that's sad. It's sad that somebody gets burnt out that quickly in our space. So, what can we do to help change that? And that's why we're here. That's why we're having these kind of conversations, and interviewing people in the podcast so team members can hear this and other business owners can hear this, because there's things have to change. And part of me wonders, is this why the great resignation, and putting that in air quotes, is happening, is because people are just, they're not putting up with it anymore.
I mean, data shows us that. Like, we prefer great reshuffle because these people didn't stop working. They just found other roles or other things. So the great reshuffle happened because, in the words of that great 90s punk anthem, we're not going to take it anymore. And there's especially people with young kids. COVID was a massive wake-up call for a lot of people. I don't want to have to commute anymore. I don't have to. Look, you can let me work from home. People who are differently abled or neurodivergent who have been told forever, you just have to come to our system. Well, look, I was really productive for the last 2 years. Why are you making me come back to the office? The COVID made people think out of the box. And when with all the lockdowns did, and when we let people think out of the box, they dream a little bit differently. And we as leaders and organizations have the choice to dream differently too, or to pretend that we can go back to the way things were before, which is never possible because we remake our lives every single day, new every day. And we could choose to be innovative in how we treat our people, the same way we're innovative with our product lines. Or we can choose to be somebody, we can choose for our company to be referred to in the past tense.
Don't want that.
No. So you got to innovate with how you treat your people.
Kristen, I really appreciate this. We're at our time here. I want to respect your time. You're a very busy person. I do have a couple just quick hit questions before we wrap up. And then if you could share how people get in contact with you, that would be great. So one question is, what book has made the most impact on your life?
To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
Oh, that's new. Okay. And why is that? What did that do?
Oh, I read it in 10th grade. And the major lesson of To Kill a Mockingbird is you don't know someone until you try to understand them.
How appropriate.
Yeah.
I haven't read that book yet, so I just wrote that down.
There's a movie from the 50s with Gregory Peck. That one's all, if you're more of a movie person, that one's a good one too. There's also a stage show that's traveling around the country that's really good. But To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite novels of all time. Okay.
And what are you doing to still grow your skills?
My major business skill that I'm really struggling with is lead generation. It's something that as an academic, I never really had to worry about. And so I am, consulting with experts. I always have a coach. I listen to a lot of podcasts and masterminds to try to continue to do that. But I'm also in a perpetual growth mode for humanity. I watch lots of documentaries. Erin and I have a YouTube channel where every single week we post videos about things we've learned about the planet and how to be more empathetic and what we've done. We go live every Tuesday with cultural things happening and how to respond to them empathetically and how to respond with understanding. We call it Cancel Culture Watch. So those are kind of those two buckets. Like professionally, this is still a real challenge for me. And so I'm growing in it. But also personally, I try to be a perpetual learner.
It's a good thing. And the final question would be, if you were to go back to the beginning of your career, which it sounds like was a little different than it is now, but if you were to go back to the beginning of your career, just say age 22, what advice would you give yourself that you know to be true today?
Remember to breathe. You can't do anything if you're not breathing. And I, at 22, was a ball of anxiety, medicated anxiety, but still a ball of anxiety, who took on, I believed I was imperative and not important. And I didn't understand that the true mark of maturity and leadership is building systems that can live without you. And so that's what I would tell sweet little 22-year-old Kristen, is to remember to breathe. And she was living in Northern Ireland and teaching sex ed at high schools. That's what she was doing.
Oh, that's fun.
Having the time of her life, and yet was still an anxious mess. So I would tell her to breathe.
power of the pause breath.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Kristen. Well, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for sharing. I have so many more questions, but we'll keep it to our time here today. And if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So the website is argooddoctors.com. And then you can always find us on socials. Abbey Research, spell it with an E, ABBEY Research. We check all of our DMs. So find us there. The website's got a contact form that you can email us directly and I'll answer it. We'd love to talk to you about anything that I said today or other ideas you've got.
Alrighty. Kristen, thank you so much for sharing, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, TJ.
Thank you for listening to Living Well with Rentwell. We hope you loved that episode.
Please be sure to head over to our website at rentwell.com/vision. We're giving away our free program called Vision Through Purposeful Action. If you're a busy person, if you struggle with finding the time and priorities, or if you're experiencing procrastination and overwhelm, this free course will help you with that.
We wish you a blessed day. Thank you for tuning in, and check in later.